So with that, I will hand it over to our moderator, Hazel, who is moderating the event. Thank you, Hazel.
Hi, evening, everyone. Welcome to the Published PTBO Roundtable. Thanks, Lucas. As Lucas said, I'm Hazel. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the programming assistant here at ArtSpace. So yeah, I'm really excited to get into this discussion. We're going to be talking about local publishing, the challenges involved, that the strategies of how folks have worked around the pandemic, managing staff, readership, all of that good stuff. As Luke said, it's very much an open session, so attendees, please, you're welcome to drop questions in the Q&A function. And when we get to the Q&A portion, I will read those questions and moderate them so our panelists can answer. Before we begin, I want to respectfully acknowledge that both ArtSpace and myself are located on the traditional territory of the Mississauga First Nation within the boundaries of Nogo-Jawanoong. So with that, I'll get our guest speakers to introduce themselves in just a moment. But we from the Arthur newspaper, Nick Taylor, Remi Absynthe, and Shaun Phuah from Trent's Absynthe magazine, and Elisha Rubacha from Bird Buried Press. So I suppose starting with the order on my screen, if Nick, you want to start us off and introduce us to yourself and Arthur newspaper.
Yes. For some reason, it's saying that I can't start my video.
Just one sec. Let me see if I can do something about that.
I mean, we can do this podcast style.
That is totally an option. If you're comfortable with that, just as we figure this out.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, there I am.
Awesome. There we go.
Sweet. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, Book and Zine Fest is always such a good time. I miss, being in person. One year I was a vendor. It was so much fun. Everyone bought my zines. Well, all my friends did. But yes, thank you so much for having me. My name is Nick Taylor. My pronouns are they, them. And I'm one of the co-editors at Arthur newspaper. So if you're not familiar with Arthur, we are the Trent University and Peterborough Nogo-Jawanoong Independent Student Press, and we have been since 1966. We are free from all administrative and commercial controls, just meaning that we're entirely independent. And so the editors of Arthur have complete creative control in that way. And yeah, we're the paper of record at Trent. So that means that, we are documenting Trent's history. There's always that cliche when it comes to journalism that journalists write the first draft of history or whatever, but at Trent, we kind of write the only draft of history because there's not really a lot of other journalism that is hyper-local about Trent. But yeah, we were founded in 1966. Our name is Arthur Newspaper because our founders were Beatles stans. And there's a scene in the Hard Day's Night where a reporter asks one of the Beatles, I think it was George, what his haircut is called. And he says, Arthur. And I guess our founders were quite infatuated with that little tidbit. And so they decided to playfully bestow it upon the newspaper, and it has stuck all these years later. One of our founders is Stephen Stone, who's actually currently the chancellor of Trent University, but he's most famous for being one of the creators of Degrassi. So Arthur and Drake have something in common. We would be nowhere without Stephen Stone. But yeah, I think, one of the most important things about Arthur is that our independence has afforded us so much in terms of our ability to really, you know, be radical and subversive. We have an archive going back all the way to the 60s, and it is so full of really incredible like labor reporting, anti-war perspectives, anti-capitalist perspectives, feminist work. My personal favorite way that Arthur is really radical is that we have a lot of like queer and trans representation, and we have for a long time. You know, if you go back into the archive, 70s, 80s, 90s, Arthur was publishing some incredibly subversive writing that I don't think was really being published anywhere else in the same kind of way. It's really inspiring, and you know, the editorial team has always taken those risks. And so there's like been this column called Gay Banter, and I suggest folks kind of take a deep dive through the archive and look for it. But we also have always had the self-representation insert Queer Lines, which actually at one point was kind of no more, just because it was a bit too subversive for people at the time. There's a lot of really funny letters to the editor complaining about like Arthur publishing nudity and all these different things. I think they're really funny, but also they're, yeah, not funny at the same time, of course. And, you know, I think that Arthur really has a unique opportunity to kind of like document the underbelly of Peterborough. Everything that like establishment media has ever really been afraid to touch is something that Arthur doesn't really tend to back down from. And I think that that has a lot to do with our independence. You know, Arthur is, I am pretty sure, the longest standing source of independent media in the city. And, you know, because of that, we're able to kind of look at Peterborough and identify gaps that we might be able to fill in the media landscape and do that work. We're really lucky that there are, you know, other independent media orgs, you know, like Peterborough Currents is doing really incredible work, even on campus, Absynthe. It's really cool to be part of that community. And I think it's something that also really sets Arthur apart from a lot of other campus papers, is that we really do take a look at Peterborough. And yeah, our lens is so much wider than just like the Trent campus. But in terms of, you know, what we actually do, we cover, you know, everything Trent related, student politics, what the administration is up to. We do a fair bit of like local arts and culture coverage as well. We do a lot of like environmental journalism, covering like land defending efforts, a lot of, you know, social justice oriented work. That's a big part of our mandate. It's been kind of a pet project of mine to try and bring investigative work to Arthur and to kind of really build those skills with the next generation of student journalists. Because I think that universities are actually a really great site for learning this kind of long form public inquiry kind of work. Because often these big bureaucratic institutions have budgets that would like rival some small municipalities. There's a lot of money moving around all the time, and it's definitely, you know, important to be critical and skeptical of that, given that Trent is, you know, supposed to be first and foremost a place of learning. For instance, last summer we broke a story about a member of the Board of Governors who had been arrested. He resigned from the board pretty quietly, and the university never made a statement about it. So that just, you know, no one would have ever known that even happened without Arthur. We've also been able to lend a critical voice to Trent's lands plan, which I think is one of the most greenwashed documents I've ever laid eyes on. But, you know, we're able to kind of look beneath the surface of that and uncover who stands to make money off of Trent's Clean Tech Commons project. Spoiler, it's Peterborough's most wealthy and powerful men. Yeah, we also, are doing a lot of podcasting work these days. We, have expanded into audio journalism, which has been super fun. I got to interview Priyanka, the winner of Canada's Drag Race Season 1 on the podcast. And that was just like one of the most exciting, enthralling interviews I've ever done, just because she's so fun and charismatic. But we've also done a lot of investigative work on the podcast as well. We've, also been kind of trying to expand into creating like virtual zines, and partnering with different organizations in the community, like Black Lives Matter Ngojuanong, the Center for Women and Trans People, and the Trent Queer Collective to collaborate on special projects. And I think, the best part of Arthur is that it's a space for students to learn about ourselves, about our community, and of course, the practical aspect, actually learning the skills, whether that's photography, editing, communications, of course, journalism. I think Arthur is a place to kind of be thrown into the deep end and have to fend for yourself in some ways, and it's really good because you learn a lot doing so. It's kind of a place to fail, and like be held in that failure by your community. I've experienced this countless times, and I'm sure some folks on this panel or in the audience could even think of some. I once heard a journalist on a podcast, a journalism professor, talking about how she tells all of her students to go out and start their careers in small towns, because there's something really unique about having to like look people in the eye at the grocery store after you've written about them in a story. And I think that is a really true of Arthur and of Peterborough. But yeah, it's a really great place to start your career. I have no formal training in journalism at all. And I'm leaving Arthur, feeling like I am equipped to start my career in the industry. I have a portfolio. And yeah, it's really incredible to have that experience and to have like been paid to learn in that way. And we have so many former editors and journalists who are out in the field doing the thing. So yeah, that's it for me.
Thanks very much, Nick. That was Nick and the Arthur newspaper. I guess I'll just move on to the next one who's on my screen. So Remi and Shaun, if you want to give us an introduction to yourselves and the Absynthe.
Hi. Okay, I'm not on mute anymore. So I'm Remi. I'm the director at Absynthe. I actually just started in this position like in September, so it's still very new to me. Absynthe is Trent's literary magazine. We're like often called the alternative press. I guess, Shaun, if you want to introduce yourself and just say a little bit.
Yeah. My name is Shaun. I'm one of the lead editors of Absynthe. We all just recently came onto these lead roles, essentially, me, Remi, and Kavya Chandra, who's not here right now. But essentially, a lot of stuff has changed with the magazine. We've opened it up to submissions from within the community itself, when originally it was all just dedicated writers that would write in every month. Absynthe is essentially Trent's creative magazine site where anybody can send creative work in, have their work read, and we're really dedicated at this point to giving feedback back to every single person that submits to us. And we just thought that this was a pretty new way of engaging with people within the community, because a lot of magazines and literary journals generally just give rejections and accept certain people, and it's a bit. We just kind of decided that it was a bit. It wasn't as personal as we wanted it to be, and we wanted to be able to have people feel like their work was being taken seriously, and so that was kind of our way of engaging with the people from around Trent, and hopefully kind of creating a larger sense of an artistic community. And yeah, so we've really enjoyed the process of reading the work from people around, and also spending that time to really engage with specific work.
Yeah, and I think like I guess it was like kind of a learning curve, like changing the whole way that we run the magazine basically. It's like in our issue we received like a solid number of submissions, but we have since like I mean, like how many, like we went from having like about 60 submissions to over 500 for an issue in the past like 2 issues. So it's definitely grown, and like I guess word is getting out to the Trent and the Peterborough community, which is really nice. So we get to see a lot of the community and like engage with their artistic work and like hear their voices, which is really awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and while we do only essentially advertise to people from within Trent and Peterborough, we do accept work from pretty much anywhere. And I think a big part of that is what I think, to a degree, thinking of the concept of being borderless, and thinking of the concept of, you know, where people really come from and how people choose to tell their stories. Just as an example, there are a lot of international students at Trent as well, and you know, at the end of the day, I'm really interested, and I think all of us at Absynthe are really interested in how we can elevate specific voices and tell stories that are not often heard.
Yeah, and I think like something that we really value at Absynthe is like any kind of artistic work that really breaks from convention, and like tries something new and says something different, or says something in a very different way. That's always really interesting to see.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, and congratulations on the amount of submissions. 500. That's crazy.
It's a little scary, honestly.
Yeah, it was a bit overwhelming to see the numbers rising.
It sounds like, but that's great that it's reaching so many people. I'd like to follow that up in one of the Q&A questions as well. But just before we get to that, Elisha, if you would like to give us an introduction to yourself and your publishing organization, take it away.
Hi, so I'm Elisha Rubacha, and I'm the founder, editor, and designer of Birdberried Press, which is a small, technically micro press in Peterborough. So we were founded by myself and my partner and poetry editor, Justin Millian, who some of you I think know. And yeah, so we've been working since 2016 on this project. We've produced over 20 chapbooks of poetry and fiction. And kind of what makes us special is that we try and include one-of-a-kind features in our work. So everything's handmade by me, produced manually in my kitchen office here. Very professional. And yeah, and so we try and incorporate these one-of-a-kind features, and often we will also make books live. So that's kind of become a big part of how we do things. So one of those times was at the Precarious Festival. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Precarious Festival run by Kate Story. During an early Precarious Festival, maybe even the first one, I put together one book called 10, which was a little sci-fi short story, and held an event called Cutting Out Lake Huron, where I literally sat there with an X-Acto knife and cut out the shape of Lake Huron from the covers of this book, which the setting of the book is obviously around Lake Huron. And I also had displayed around the room a whole installation of the rest of the process involved in making the book. So the digital design process was playing on a computer. There was some cutting that I was doing that was filmed and projected, and you just got to see kind of every piece of the making process. So a lot of what we've been doing is about kind of showing the invisible labor behind small press. So yeah, we've done that a number of ways. We've also done like events where the writing happens live. Justin, if you don't know Justin, he for several years did an event called Keyboards, where he would live write on a typewriter in front of an audience, usually at the Garnet, but in a variety of locations, and still kind of does it pop-up style here and there, but it's not technically keyboards anymore. And so we did, for that, we did a book called Duel, where him and his friend Jeff Blackman did dueling keyboards. And so they kind of were competing in a sense, but also we were all just kind of together producing this book. So that book came with a set of like completely unique poems. You would get a book that had a poem that was typewritten, potentially right in front of you if you were in the room, and incorporated into the book. So you would have the only copy of that poem in the world. I didn't take pictures of it or anything, generally speaking, and you would just have the one-of-a-kind book. So that's been a lot of kind of how we've operated is around that. And also just like to go back to the one-of-a-kind detail thing a bit, I try and do covers that include, like one of our covers is an actual matchstick, like a wooden match taped to the front cover, which was also a book by Justin called Kill Your Way North. And yeah, there's a cover that has a milkweed seed in it, a different, every cover has its own milkweed seed. Nick Taylor here recently published with us a book called Foul Mouth, which was very painstakingly, I will say, painted covers, a stencil. It was supposed to be 2 stencils, but ended up being 1 because things didn't work out quite as planned. And then a hand stroke. So the stencil was a picture of Nick, actually, that I'd kind of distorted. And then I painted on their lips with just a stroke of red. And of course, that book, like many of our chapbooks, sold out very quickly, even though it came out during COVID, which is kind of miraculous. I know there's a question about that later, so I might leave the bits about COVID until later on when we're talking about that more generally. But yeah, we've really leaned heavily into the one-of-a-kind and like laborious type of hand making. I kind of find that people really appreciate having a cover that's different than all the other covers in some way, because you're simultaneously a part of something bigger where many people have this work in front of them, but somehow your copy is different from everybody else's. And that's kind of the aesthetic that we've leaned into and that people really seem to take to. Yeah, maybe that might be all I'll say for now. I feel like a lot of the other things I was going to say are addressing the questions that I think Hazel and the rest of the Artspace team has prepared. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Elisha. Thanks for the background on the project. That sounds incredible. Yeah, so I wanted to, Dylan has just messaged in the chat here. Oh, sorry, my bad. That's just to us. Not everyone can see that. But what I thought that she was going to point out was now we are going to segue into the Q&A section, which is going to be open for attendees. So in case anyone missed the intro and has just joined since, please, you can use the Q&A function if anyone has any questions they'd like to raise for all 3 panelists or someone individually, and I will moderate through that. But in the meantime, I wanted to get started with a question, Shaun, you kind of touched on in your intro, but I wanted to talk about outreach. So you mentioned about giving the feedback to the individual people who submitted. So maybe Nick and Elisha, you can jump in on this one more. But I'm wondering, what are some ways that all of you guys encourage the community members of Ngojunong Peterborough to participate in your work, whether that is in a journalistic or creative capacity, and also if you've needed to shift those strategies at all in light of pandemic or COVID changes, those outreach strategies?
Well, I would say with Absynthe, it was somewhat easy in terms of getting submissions. As early on, we got less submissions, but a lot of the submissions came through, as an example, a Reddit post I made on the r/Peterborough subreddit, along with other things like putting posters around downtown Peterborough, and then having people like amazing people like Patricia Heffernan of the English and Cultural Studies department at Trent send out a mass email to everybody within the English department. And so it was easy to reach people through that. What I love the most, and what I think is really important for us as far as engaging with the actual submissions though, is recognizing the need for really constructive feedback, and not just, pointlessly putting people down, or like looking at a piece and only looking at the bad, and then talking to people about how their piece is not good, etc. But legitimately looking at what is good and what could be improved upon, and using language that that hopefully is as constructive as possible, and engaging with them on a level that we recognize the level of creative writing that they're at, and engaging with that on a level that even if, let's say, somebody is a beginner writer and it shows through their work, I like the idea of having to look at what is positive about that work anyway, about the subject matter that they choose to tackle. And yeah, I think hopefully that they receive that feedback and can see the ways in which their work can improve.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. I can verify that it works, because I did submit some things to the Absynthe, visual art and writing, and I did really appreciate the feedback that I got on the writing. So thank you guys for that on a personal note. But yeah, I still think it's incredible that you managed to do that for every single submission.
I'm really glad to hear that.
Nick or Elisha, or Remi, did you want to follow up on that at all?
I just wanted to add something, not necessarily to address your question directly there, Hazel, but to add on to what Shaun was saying about feedback. Something I forgot to say was that when Bird Buried started, one of our major aims was to give feedback to every person who submitted. And for a while, we did a really good job of that, and it was really valuable for a lot of people. And I should say we also only publish people that are from or living in Ontario. And so I think it really helped a lot of people kind of develop their process and have a chance to just have someone to connect with, because a lot of people don't have a literary community around them, especially if you live in rural Ontario or wherever. You might not have a university community around you. So that was a big part of how we were doing things up until I started working full time at my job at Nourish. And then we totally had to just stop doing that, because it was no longer feasible at all for us to keep up with the number of submissions. So if you guys are keeping up with 500 submissions on a regular basis, I salute you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Nick, were you about to speak?
No, you go.
So yeah, keeping up with 500 submissions. So basically the way we're doing that is we're kind of separating who gives feedback, because we're a team of 6 people that read through and provide feedback on submissions. So that's how we're doing that. But yeah, I totally forgot what my point was that I was gonna say. Oh yeah, part of the reason why we value giving feedback so much is whenever in my experience anyway, whenever I submit writing to a literary magazine, it's you either just get like a rejection email, or like you don't hear anything, it's radio silence. And so like that can be really discouraging as a creator, to just like not hear anything back, or to just like get rejection after rejection and like not know why. So I think like giving constructive feedback like allows people to actually like look at where they're at in their writing and be able to like take something from that experience and grow from it, which is something that like I've never really seen before in another literary magazine in my experience. So yeah.
And I guess partially we figured that since Absynthe is affiliated with Trent anyway, and as far as Trent being a place of education, you know, it was a good idea to try and engage with that concept of trying to, I guess, educate, quote unquote. But I mean, a lot of it comes from the writer themselves, and yeah, we just thought it'd be a good way to bring that experience not only to the writer but also the editors, which are all from Trent.
Yeah, I think to just, I guess, jump back to the question, it was about outreach and COVID, right? Yeah, okay. I think it's changed how we do things to a certain extent. It's definitely a lot harder to like physically reach people. And, you know, obviously doing everything online really changes how we relate and kind of what's possible. In terms of, especially, I think that editing piece that we've all been chatting about, because I don't know, we used to be able to kind of do like a live edit maybe in the office with one of our writers, and now everything is kind of really impersonal over Google Docs, and you know, it's challenging to make sure that I think that editing is a really like there's a lot of emotional labor involved in like doing that kind of like making sure that you're like explaining things in a way that actually will be like receptive, that people can be receptive to, and yeah, really just kind of meet people where they're at, especially at like a student org like Arthur. We, you know, really want to connect with anyone in the community who wants to publish with us. I know that a lot of folks who aren't students look to Arthur to publish things that maybe they don't think will always get accepted by other orgs. For example, recently, Karl Orzechowski, who is also known as Garbage Face, published something with us about kind of this like cultural, political amnesia, kind of like relating our current political moment to a lot of the discourse around freedom after 9/11. And he made a joke when he shared it that like he sent it to us because he wanted to cuss in his article, and he knew that he could if he sent it to us. So yeah, I think we're just, you know, trying to think about how we can be a public square when public space is so fraught right now. And yeah, any way that we can do that is always great. Send me a letter to the editor, please.
I do have a question from one of the attendees, but just before we move on to that, Elisha, I know you mentioned in your intro that there was something you were saving for later related to COVID, and I did have just one more COVID-related question, just about if there are any other major challenges that COVID has brought on, maybe more in the publishing versus the outreach side of things.
Yeah, so COVID has been, well, presented challenges mostly around not having small press fairs, because I used to go to Ottawa and like occasionally Toronto to sell books. And Ottawa in particular was like a really good place for me to make sales. We have a lot of people in Ottawa, like Justin and I both, he went to school at Carleton there for years, and I grew up in like the Ottawa Valley, so that's like a good spot for us. We can turn over a lot of product in Ottawa. And so COVID obviously has gotten in the way of that, but so has the lack of Greyhound bus. I don't think people have fully appreciated how like severe a problem it is that we don't have a national transportation system that like deals with like inner city travel and like especially rural communities. Like it's kind of a terrible situation that we have. So that's just an aside, but that's a big problem for the press because I can't get to where I need to go. I don't drive. And so it's the only way for me to get there. It was the only way for me to get there. And then, yeah, I did because of that, we've had to kind of strategize around how we're going to sell books. So I was a big proponent of getting Book and Zine Fest to happen because I really wanted this to be possible. So I kind of pushed to make sure that it existed this year, and was delighted to have the opportunity to make the poster as well. Thank you for that. And yeah, so one of the strategies we used for Nick Taylor's book actually was to make a book trailer that we could share online. And I think that really made a huge difference in selling the book really fast. People enjoyed the Nick on roller skates video. I think it was pretty great. And so that was one way. We had tried book trailers actually before the pandemic, and I don't think they worked as well. So I feel like people are actually kind of paying more attention for things online now in a way that they might not have before. And it was also, selling someone local, which is easy for us to do. We've been kind of leaning more into local publishing, like Peterborough publishing, mostly because we've kind of changed to a solicitation model rather than a submissions model since I started working full time. And so, yeah, it's just been easier to ask people that we know and that we know we like their work for that work to publish. So yeah, that's just a couple of things. The other thing that we've done, going back to the live production of books, was the most recent Precarious Festival, which we just had last year. Justin and I did a bookmaking marathon. We actually did 24 hours of live streamed bookmaking. So I made 24 unique covers, all completely different. And Justin wrote 24 poems, and they were all based on prompts that we asked for from the community. And we asked for them to be impossible prompts. We wanted to stump Justin, to make it hard, make it interesting for me, but to a difficult poem was the idea for the prompt. And so we got a bunch of great ones. Justin produced amazing poems, which you can still hear online. There's a time-lapse video where they've overlaid his reading the poems. So you can find that online on, I think, the Theater on King website. But yeah, it was kind of one of the more epic things that we've done, and it was great to be able to live stream. And the chat box was actually so much fun. People really, I didn't expect anyone to watch because I was like, who's gonna watch a 24-hour event? People kept coming back and kept chatting, and it was just amazing. I felt so connected to people, and I really didn't it was a surprise to us that it worked out that way. So that was another thing that we did that really helped kind of make COVID work for us, essentially.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that it's not all bad, and that folks are figuring out ways to work around it that are getting a lot of attention. And speaking of streaming and chats, we do have a question from one of the attendees. So I'll just read this per word here. Here we go. As editors, what skills and experience do you feel are important to your ability to do that work, editing work? What do you look for in the editorial process of writing and publications that you value?
Well, I would say, as far as Absynthe goes, that it's pretty necessary to have read a fair bit of work from people in general, and to be able to recognize. I feel like I'm just filling up the question again. Yeah, well, and just to be able to look at a lot of different work and to see how each work really does have its own merit, and there isn't just a single template for good work. I feel like there are often times where it can feel like art has a specific form that it needs to have, or that's the impression that I get from many public publications in general, or contests as an example, where it can feel like writing or narrative feels like it needs to have a certain structure, or it needs to be a certain way for it to be quote unquote good. And while there are techniques and certain things that a piece of narrative can excel at, I think it's really important for us as a creative magazine to be able to recognize when a piece of work has a merit that is not often recognized or isn't usually noticed to be something that is necessarily really strong in a piece of narrative. Like what is the intention of a piece really is what I think is really important for us.
Yeah, I really love this question. I think that there are like so many different skills involved in editing. But I think that, yeah, something that I have really appreciated that we've kind of been trying to work on in Arthur's editing process is just trying to like build in like artist autonomy and let writers like have the final say. I mean, obviously within the confines of journalism, that can be tricky because some things you just can't publish, and obviously there does have to be very much that back and forth. But I think it's really important for writers at Arthur to like have access to all the comments and all of the kind of like nitty gritty work that goes into editing and being able to like have that back and forth. I think that being an editor has really strengthened my writing in ways that I like totally could not have imagined. It makes a lot of sense that it does, but yeah, I think just like having kind of that lens into the other side, it's really generative, like mutually beneficial, kind of both sides, writing and editing simultaneously. I think as a writer, I've learned a lot about what I value as an editor. And so I'm often just trying to emulate that in the work that I am doing. I'm really pedantic. I think like if Lena's still in the room, she can attest because she was my editor at Arthur. But I would be so particular about things, like something would get changed in copy editing and I'd be like, actually, no, like I needed that there. So as an editor, I'm really trying to like make sure that at the end of the day, writers just feel really confident about putting their name on whatever is being published and that they can stand by it and that they feel proud of it. And that, yeah, we can have it be the best article or piece of writing that it can be.
I really appreciate that, Nick, about like the writer autonomy. I have actually, like in my own writing, I've pulled a submission before that was accepted because they wanted to make edits that just like ruined the story. So having some control over your work is definitely valuable for sure. And then, yeah, to answer the question, yeah, what skills and experience do I feel are important? That's weird. It's hard to like think about myself in that way for some reason. I feel like what comes to mind is like an appreciation for weirdness has been really valuable for me. A lot of what I'm looking for when I'm assessing work is like, how can I do something interesting visually with this? Because the design for me is such a huge part of what we do, that like if I can't come up with kind of a weird, interesting way of presenting the material that connects like content and form, if I can't do that, like I might not accept it, or I'll have to like think, if I really like it, I'll have to think long and hard about how I'm going to do that. A lot of the time it's poetry and Justin selects it. We usually like come to an agreement about them, but he'll kind of say like, let's do this, and bring forward like Nick Taylor, for instance. And then other times, like there's been a couple of poets that I really liked, like Catherine Hive, another local. She had this great set of Craigslist found poems that were like very dirty, really highlighted like the closeted rural queer community, which was really interesting to me. And so we just like asked, yeah, PTBO NSA, thank you, Nick. It was so good. And so, yeah, just looking for weird things is a lot of what I want. And, you know, some of the time that means that wouldn't necessarily be published elsewhere. Other times it's like kind of a nice launching pad for writers. Like not to take any credit for where writers go after we publish them, but we have had a lot of writers that have gone on to have trade books. So that's exciting to see for sure. So, whatever weirdness I'm appreciating, I guess, is also being appreciated by others. So that's good. But yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm looking for, is more weird, the better.
Awesome. Thanks, Elisha. Remi, did you want to comment on that at all? I see you have something in the chat there as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of circle to what Nick was saying about autonomy with writers. And I kind of posted something about it in the chat, but I think that even at Absynthe, we find that to be very important for us too. Once we choose what submissions we're accepting for our magazine, when we go through and edit, it's always suggestions that we pass back to the writer for them to approve. It's not you have to change this, you have to change that. It's would you like to change this? I think it might be a good idea to kind of rework this a little bit. I don't know, I think it should be a collaborative process where you work together to make the piece better, instead of just an editor going in and saying do this, do this, do this. And then if you don't do this, your work's not getting published, kind of thing. That feels very icky to me. Yeah, so it's definitely a collaborative process for us.
Great, thanks everyone for the answer, and thank you, Michael, for the question. That was a great question. Elisha, some of what you were talking about with that project, PTBO NSA, is a good segue into this next question I have, which is about marginalized artists and marginalized voices. I'm wondering, all of you, if any of you are facing any challenges with that. Nick, I know you mentioned what the Arthur is concerned with is social justice related. So maybe you could jump in on this to get us started if you want. But yeah, just are you facing any challenges in ensuring that marginalized voices are heard through your publishing?
Yeah, I can totally jump in. I think that, historically Arthur has been, like I mentioned before, very queer, but often predominantly white. And I think a lot of the time when we talk about centering marginalized voices, especially racialized voices in Peterborough, it gets brought up that Peterborough is really white or Trent's really white. And while there may be elements of truth in this, I feel like it's a cop-out. I don't know, I just think there are always ways to reach new audiences and bring new voices in. And one way we've really found success in this is just by partnering with groups in Peterborough that are already really doing this work of trying to amplify different perspectives. And so that's led us to do special projects with the Center for Women and Trans People and the Trent Queer Collective. Most recently, we partnered with Black Lives Matter No Go Juanong to do a takeover issue of our print edition for Black History Month. So we got to fund some really incredible pieces that were, proliferated all over the city, which is really great. Yeah, I think just, being able to look at what's going on in the city and connect with the folks who are already doing that work is a really good place to start in terms of trying to reach new audiences that maybe haven't always been as included.
Well, for Absynthe, it was pretty, just as an example, I guess. We got this piece in the first issue that we did in our most recent change of our lead editors and our director. But we got this piece essentially about schizophrenia and about the writer's experience with schizophrenia. And on first look, this was actually a piece that the editors, we all had to discuss for a while, because on a technical level, the writing was pretty good, but it was not technically amazing in that sense of the word. But at the same time, we thought that it had such a really strong and specific voice, and was dealing with an idea and subject matter that was so personal and honestly brave in a lot of ways. And so we decided to publish that story as a form of telling that perspective, but also, you know, in engaging with that writer themselves. And at the end of the day, I think that's also a part of the reason why we found it really important to have to be able to pay our writers as well, as it kind of creates, I mean, you know, payment allows a level of professionality, I guess, or like, you know, there's a lot of publications that do not pay their writers, which is fine, but at the same time, I think being able to do that from the funding from Trent University really allows us to help writers feel like they're being taken very seriously, and that their work is being taken seriously, and subject matters like schizophrenia as an example, like, and their personal experience with that is, you know, something that is worth money and time in a lot of ways. I mean, in this capitalistic structure that we live in. And yeah, I just thought it was, and eventually I actually found out from my barber that it was, you know, he's Filipino, and it's his sister that submitted that story. And I had not known that initially, but, you know, knowing that and being able to engage with a specific community, and especially an international one, especially since, again, like, Peterborough is just so full of immigrants, and that is my experience as well. You know, I'm from Malaysia, and being able to engage with that voice, and on a level of not just reading it and then publishing it after a few edits, but legitimately, you know, talking about the structure of a story with a specific writer. I hope anyway, really helps to elevate a specific voice and a specific perspective.
There's a lot of stuff happening in the chat around paid publication, and I just kind of want to jump onto that quickly. Bird Buried has been paying people for a long time, I think maybe always to some extent. I mean, not much necessarily, but we've been very dedicated to paying our artists. Someone mentioned that paid publications can help you get grants. And so we actually, when we found out that the amount of money was irrelevant to those grant applications, we decided to just publish a bunch of poems on our website and pay people $1, just so they can start applying for grants, because there are great programs like the Recommender Grant program through OAC. And if you have, you know, I think it's 3 paid publications, you can apply and you can get, you know, $1,000, $3,000, whatever. And goes a long way. So yeah, just wanted to kind of piggyback on that quickly. And then, yeah, in terms of marginalized writers, I feel like the challenging piece is kind of what Nick was saying was a cop-out, is like actually finding the people. But when we had open submissions, I didn't really find that to be that challenging. People submitted and we published the work that we liked, kind of regardless of where those people were in their lives or who they were, what their identities were. It was just about the quality of the work for us. And so, yeah, we don't while I appreciate like an equity statement on a publisher's website, we don't have one, because I have no, you know, there's not going to be a systemic problem with us. I feel like, in the same way that there will be at like a big publishing house with lots of gatekeepers and whatever. We're just going to publish what we like. And that's kind of where we're at. And so we've had, you know, I could name drop some people, but I feel like it's kind of tokenism to do that. So I won't do that, but there's lots of people on our website if you want to check them out and kind of follow up on who they are and where they're at. But yeah, it's obviously like incredibly important to amplify those voices. A lot of the work that I do at Nourish actually is around amplifying and kind of developing marginalized voices, especially around like developing leadership skills. Like I run this peer advocacy series, which is very much about that. So I totally appreciate how valuable that is, and that there are spaces for people to tell those stories.
Great, thank you, Elisha. Unless anyone else wanted to jump on that, just feel free to unmute or cut me off as I'm speaking now. But if not, then I would just going to go on to the final question I have prepared, and that is, all of you are very much based in Bro, Ngao and I'm just wondering what everyone is thinking about the sort of the connective tissue, I guess you would say. Like, what in all of your opinions is the thing that brings the community together?
Quaker Oats. No, I'm kidding. The smell from the factory. No, I think, I don't know. I was trying to think. I like this question a lot. I don't have an excellent answer. I think that in some ways the connective tissue of Peterborough is just like chaos. It's kind of a place where chaos seems to reign. Maybe I've just been reading too much chaos theory. I don't know. But I think that, our city routinely finds itself atop lists that no one wants to be on, whether it's unemployment, housing insecurity, food insecurity, deaths stemming from the toxic drug crisis. In a lot of ways, we exemplify the departure of industry in like neoliberal globalization in North America. And, we're represented by two incompetent, perhaps negligent conservative politicians. I feel comfortable saying that because I know they won't be watching this. But I think that, that obviously paints a picture. In some ways, it feels like Peterborough is like a microcosm of, the larger whole, or like a distillation of all these problems. Like, things seem to be kind of heightened here, but I think at the same time that really creates the conditions for like so much resilience and community building and mutual aid to happen. And there's so much good work happening in the community. And I think that the arts community in Peterborough is a really big part of that, like, resilience and also reimagining, building a new world. And I think that, our arts community has been so good at, bringing attention to precarious labor. Precarious Festival was mentioned earlier. Elisha's got the shirt. Elisha is such a strong advocate for like basic income through like an arts lens. And yeah, I think that that's just something that brings me a lot of hope, which is always like, it feels cliche to bring up. And I'm a Zoomer, so I'm supposed to be perpetually nihilistic, but there are good things happening here for sure. And we should talk about them.
I love that, Nick. I always, the talking about like the many lists that Peterborough ends up on that are not good lists is something that I think about a lot. And I feel very lucky that I work with a lot of the people who are working to, get us off those lists. And so I kind of have a unique perspective, I feel like, on Peterborough from that angle, is just that, I get to see the good stuff too. But if the connective tissue question is about the arts community, I can only really speak for myself here, but I would say that it's the theater community that's the connective tissue of the general arts community. It's not the printed word as much as I would like to say that it is. I would say that like the kind of hub for Peterborough right now is the Theater on King, where Kate Story and Ryan Kerr and like all those people who are amazing and some of my favorite people work and help to make other work happen and make sure that people are paid for it. If you don't know what they're doing, or you don't know about the Precarious Festival or the Theater on King, I strongly recommend you start going to things. You could start with Joy of Bob. Look that up.
Did anyone else want to jump in on that last question? And Shaun, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I would say that for me, Peterborough is, well, I guess Nick has touched on this in a lot of ways as well, but it feels to me like a very punk space, in terms of, how people are willing to really do extremely DIY things. It's very chaotic in that way, but it at the same time allows for some really, really interesting things to happen. And there's just, I mean, unfortunately, just as an example, like a place like the Garnet, which recently has closed, but like as an example, the ways that artists were so willing to engage with one another and come to like a space like the Garnet, and meet each other, and also to just generally exist in the space of Peterborough and work together in that way. I thought that was really interesting in a lot of different ways, and not something that is that common in anymore in some ways. And other than that, I really like how this is an interesting aspect of Peterborough to me, but it's such a transitory space in a lot of ways. And I think that allows for a lot of different voices to be heard, but at the same time for a lot of really interesting art pieces to make themselves apparent at the same time.
Yeah, I guess when you were mentioning about the Garnet, that made me think of like in my experience, like I find the connective tissue of Peterborough to be very much rooted in like small local like businesses and organizations, and like just because like I find that's like there's such like a like meaningful community that's built in those spaces, and like it's what has made Peterborough feel like home to me, and yeah, I don't know.
Great. I love all of those answers. Thank you all for that. But yeah, that was the last question for tonight. So thank you so much to all our speakers, Nick, Remi, Shaun, and Elisha. Thanks so much for coming and for participating. Thank you everyone for attending. It's been so much fun to moderate. And then just again, as a reminder, this is part of our Book and Zine Fest, which is running all week until Sunday. We got one more panel coming this week on Thursday, also at 7, called Other Art Criticism, and that's going to be featuring off-center femme art review and peripheral review, some independent arts criticism publications. So you can find the information for that on our website or through our social media, which links to our website. And then also keep an eye on our Instagram page on Friday morning, and that's going to be when Remi is doing their Instagram takeover to share some work and creative process stuff, so definitely hyped for that. And then on Sunday, we recently added another one by M. Farquhar Berry, so same idea except on Sunday morning, so keep an eye out for that as well. Just want to give a quick shout out. None of this would have been possible without support from a couple places: the Ontario Arts Council, Canada Council for the Arts, the City of Peterborough itself, and the DBIA, Downtown Business Improvement Area. And we also got some help from local businesses, so Watson & Lou, Iceman Video Games, and Black Honey Cafe, which I cannot recommend enough, so please check them out as well. But yeah, that's everything for this week, I believe. Oh, did want to give a quick shout out to the Absynthe and Birdbury. They do have vendor booths on our site as part of Book and Zine Fest. And I think someone mentioned the Trent Center for Women and Trans People as well, and they also have a booth active. So yeah, that's all for me for tonight. Thanks everyone so much for coming. This has been great.
Thanks for having us.